It was at the reading of my husband's will, when my own daughter-in-law, Isabella, looked me square in the eye and declared that I was left with nothing. She, on the other hand, had full control of the $85 million fortune we had spent a lifetime building together. My name is Alice Thompson. I'm a 72-year-old widow from Palm Beach, Florida, and this is the story of how I was erased from my own life by the woman I once considered a daughter. Before I get into it, if my story happens to touch your heart, I hope you'll pass this story along to the ones you hold dear. And most importantly, I'd love for you to leave a comment down below, share your own story, or your thoughts on family betrayal, so we can all listen and maybe heal a little together. Today was the day the will was to be read, or, to be more precise, the day Isabella, my daughter-in-law, would interpret her father-in-law's will. What a peculiar turn of phrase, isn't it? A will is a will, clear words on paper, a person's final testament. Why on earth would it need to be interpreted? The letter from Isabella's law firm had arrived last week, its language polite and formal, but as cold as a surgeon's scalpel. A family meeting at her office, 10 o'clock sharp. Not a single word of inquiry about how I was holding up, not a sliver of warmth, just the time and place, like a court summons. I looked in the mirror as I got ready. My own face, with its wrinkles etched deep like dried-up riverbeds, felt like a stranger's. I chose a silk dress the color of sea blue, the color of Stanley's eyes. I wanted to carry a piece of him with me to that place, like a lucky charm, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. I fastened the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. The pearls felt cool against my skin, but they couldn't soothe the embers of anxiety smoldering in my chest. Isabella. She had always been a bit of an enigma to me. She came into our family 15 years ago, a young, brilliant, and fiercely ambitious lawyer who captured the heart of our only son David before a tragic car accident stole him from us just 2 years later. After David's death, Isabella didn't leave. She stayed, gradually weaving herself into the fabric of Stanley's business empire and his charitable work. Stanley always admired her intellect and her decisiveness. "She's got a fire in her, Alice," he used to say. A fire that could warm a city or burn it to the ground. I never truly understood what he meant by that, not until today. On the outside, Isabella was the picture of perfection. A socialite, a celebrated philanthropist, a lawyer with an impeccable record. She always treated me with a carefully measured respect, with smiles at all the right moments and inquiries that were perfectly timed. But her eyes, those intelligent ash-gray eyes of hers, always held an icy wall I could never seem to break through. There was a kind of sorrow, a deep-seated defensiveness in her gaze that I could never quite put my finger on. The taxi whisked me through the palm-lined boulevards of Palm Beach. Magnificent villas hid behind wrought iron fences, their gardens manicured to perfection, all exuding a sense of wealth and order that felt almost soulless. This world had been Stanley's and mine, but now it felt like it belonged to Isabella. Her law firm occupied the top floor of a glass and steel skyscraper, a monument to cold, unfeeling modern power. When I stepped out of the elevator, a young assistant in a black business dress led me into the conference room. The room felt like an icebox. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the sterile light from the recessed ceiling lamps. One entire wall was glass, offering a panoramic view of the city and the distant ocean. The view was breathtaking, but it only made me feel smaller, more insignificant. The air smelled of new paper, window cleaner, and an invisible kind of authority. 2 other lawyers, middle-aged men in dark suits, were already seated. They nodded at me, a polite but distant greeting. They were Isabella's people. I knew that much. I chose a chair at the far end of the table, feeling the cold luxury leather against my back. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of papers and the near-silent tick of a digital wall clock. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the door opened, and Isabella entered. She wore an ivory-white pantsuit, tailored to millimeter perfection. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing a slender neck and exquisite diamond earrings. She didn't walk, she glided, as if the very floor was made to serve her every step. She placed a slim crocodile leather briefcase on the table with a soft but decisive click. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and controlled, echoing in the room's silence. "Thank you all for coming, especially you, Alice. I know this is a difficult time." Her words were so smooth, so perfect, but they didn't reach me. They were like polished river stones, cold and lifeless. She took her seat at the head of the table, folding her hands formally. "We are here today to carry out the final wishes of my father-in-law, Stanley Thompson. I, as the designated executor of the will, have carefully reviewed all the documents and consulted with my legal team to ensure that his legacy is protected and will flourish in the best possible way." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, but it skimmed right past me as if I were part of the furniture. "Stanley's will is very clear about his vision," she continued, her voice now taking on the serious tone of a CEO presenting a business strategy. He wanted his legacy to remain whole, not to be fragmented or weakened by personal sentiments that could affect its long-term growth. Therefore, according to his final wishes, the entire estate, including all real estate, investments, and most importantly, the priceless art collection with a total value of $85 million, will be consolidated into a single legal entity, the Thompson Legacy Foundation. That number just hung there in the air, cold and cruel, $85 million, our entire life. The room seemed to tilt. I had to grip the arms of my chair. The entire estate? Consolidated. My own voice sounded faint, a stranger's whisper. Isabella finally looked at me, a gaze filled with calculated pity. "Yes, Alice, it's the best way to protect his legacy. As executor and president of the foundation, I will be primarily responsible for overseeing all of its operations." "And what about me?" I asked, and the word "me" sounded so small, so meaningless next to that staggering number. Isabella smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, Stanley would never forget you. The will has a clear provision. You will retain full, lifelong ownership and residence of the Palm Beach house. In addition, the foundation will provide you with a monthly stipend, a very generous one, to ensure you can live comfortably without a single worry." I felt the blood drain from my face. A chill ran down my spine, not from the room's temperature, but from the cruelty hidden behind those polished words. Full ownership of the house, a stipend. I wasn't an heir, not Stanley's partner of 50 years. I'd been turned into a dependent, a burden to be generously managed. My entire life, everything Stanley and I had built together, was now reduced to a side note. "But we built all of that together," I stammered, my throat suddenly dry. "The art collection, that was our soul." "I understand, Alice," Isabella cut in, her tone still soft but now firm as steel. "And because it is so precious, Stanley decided it should be placed under professional management to preserve its value. As the executor and president of the foundation, I will be primarily responsible for directing all of these activities." And that was it, the final verdict. She hadn't just taken the assets, she had taken my place, my role, my voice. She had reinterpreted my life with Stanley to suit her own narrative, and not a single person in that room raised an objection. The other two lawyers just nodded mechanically, as if this were just another day at the office. I didn't hear what she said after that. Words like long-term strategy, asset optimization, and charitable trusts floated in the air like pesky insects. A low hum filled my ears. I stared out the glass wall. The Palm Beach sky was still, quite cruelly, a perfect blue. White yachts drifted lazily on the sparkling sea. The world was carrying on perfectly, completely unaware that inside this icebox, a life had just been erased. The meeting ended. Isabella stood, shook hands with the lawyers. She walked over to me, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. "Don't you worry," she said, her voice a caring whisper. "Everything will be taken care of. You just need to rest." I couldn't look her in the eye. I just nodded, feeling an exhaustion that went bone deep. I rose to my feet, my legs feeling heavy as lead. The young assistant reappeared and politely escorted me to the elevator. As the polished metal doors slid shut, reflecting my distorted image, I felt like I was being sealed in a silver coffin. The taxi ride home felt endless. I looked out the window, but I didn't really see anything. The palm trees, the green lawns, the magnificent homes were all just a colorful blur. My mind could only hear Isabella's words, twisted, interpreted, and rearranged to serve a single purpose. She hadn't lied. No, Isabella was far too clever for that. She had cherry-picked the truth, trimmed it, and presented it in such a way that the whole truth became a lie. When I arrived, the house greeted me with the silence of a tomb. I walked into the living room, where the large portrait of Stanley and me hung above the fireplace, painted for our 25th anniversary. In the painting, we were smiling, our eyes full of happiness and trust. I reached out and touched Stanley's face on the oil canvas. "Stanley," I whispered, "what happened, my love?" But only silence answered. A heavy silence, thick with the stench of betrayal. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep, too stunning for tears. I just felt a cold emptiness spreading through me, extinguishing the last bit of warmth that Stanley's memory had left behind. That day, standing in my own home, for the very first time in my life, I felt homeless. The days following that fateful meeting passed in a blur. I lived, breathed, and moved through my own home like a ghost, an uninvited tourist in the museum of my own life. Every object, from the worn leather armchair Stanley loved to the porcelain tea set we'd bought on a trip to England, felt alien. They were no longer warm mementos but cold exhibits in a crime where I was the only victim. I felt as if the walls were closing in, the air growing thinner, my voice no longer having the strength to echo. The arrangements for Stanley's memorial service happened around me, but not with me. Isabella had taken over everything with a chilling efficiency, a terrifying perfection. She didn't ask for my input on anything, not about Stanley's favorite flowers, which were sunflowers, not those stark, soulless white lilies, not about the music he'd want to hear one last time, a Johnny Cash tune, not this dreary, formal classical music, and certainly not about where he would want to be remembered. Isabella had chosen the Museum of Modern Art, where Stanley had been a major patron. It was a picture-perfect choice for her image, but it was completely wrong in spirit. Stanley admired art, but he loathed the stuffy, pretentious social events held in places like that. "Art is for feeling, Alice, not for propping up champagne glasses and meaningless chatter," he always used to say. But now, his memory was about to become the backdrop for Isabella's greatest performance. The house phone rang constantly, but never for me. It was Isabella's assistant, the event coordinator, the florist, the caterer. My home had been turned into a command center, and I was just a civilian who had wandered into a war zone. I often retreated to the back garden, the only place I still felt a flicker of connection to Stanley. He had planted the magnolia tree in the corner with his own hands. Every spring, it bloomed with fragrant white flowers. I'd sit on the stone bench beneath it, close my eyes, and try to conjure his image, his voice. But those images were growing fainter, drowned out by the powerful, cold presence of Isabella. And then, the day of the memorial arrived. The Palm Beach sky was mockingly blue, without a single cloud. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to my own father's funeral years ago. It wasn't designer, it wasn't a fashion statement, it was simply the uniform of grief. When the car dropped me off at the museum, I was overwhelmed. This didn't feel like a place of remembrance. It felt like a premiere, a charity gala. A line of luxury cars snaked down the street. The guests were dressed in black, but it was the most expensive designer black you could imagine. Society photographers were clustered in a corner, cameras ready to capture the most touching moments. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the cloying scent of those white lilies, arranged in colossal bouquets, a smell so sweet it made me nauseous. The polished marble floors reflected the dim, golden light, making everything look like an elaborate stage set. I walked inside, lost in a sea of faces that were familiar but not friendly. They were Stanley's business partners, high society figures, philanthropists I'd only met in passing at parties. They approached me, shook my hand, and offered their hollow condolences. "Such a terrible loss," said a woman wearing a heavy string of pearls. "Stanley was a great man," added a man whose face was flushed from too much wine. Their words washed over me, leaving no trace. They didn't really see me. They were just performing a social duty. And at the center of it all was Isabella. She was a masterpiece of perfectly crafted grief. She wore a designer black dress that hugged her slender frame, at once modest and powerful. Her blonde hair was swept up, revealing exquisite black pearl earrings. Her makeup was expertly applied, just enough to look pale and sorrowful, but not enough to detract from her beauty. She moved through the crowd, a glass of mineral water in hand, accepting condolences with a graceful nod, a gentle squeeze of the hand. She was a master actress, and this was the role of a lifetime. The service began. A few curated speakers went up to the podium. A business partner spoke of Stanley's strategic vision. A museum director spoke of his generosity. They were all polished eulogies, pre-written tributes. They spoke of Stanley Thompson, the magnate, the philanthropist, the city icon. But no one spoke of Stan, the husband who loved to walk barefoot in the garden, the father who told the worst dad jokes, the man who could sit for hours just watching a small bird build its nest. My Stan was gone, replaced by a legend of Isabella's making. Then, Isabella took the stage. The entire hall fell silent. A spotlight found her, making her the sole focus. She began to speak, her voice trembling with calculated control. She didn't talk much about the past. Instead, she talked about the future. "Stanley Thompson is not gone," she declared, her voice ringing through the vast space. "He has merely transformed his legacy into a new form, a form that will last forever. The Thompson Legacy Foundation will not just be a name, it will be a beacon, continuing to light the path he forged, shaping the future, and ensuring that his vision lives on." Her speech was powerful, inspirational. It was met with a round of heartfelt applause. People nodded in approval. They were captivated by the image of the strong, devoted daughter-in-law, ready to shoulder such a heavy burden. I just sat there, numb. She hadn't memorialized Stanley. She was officially crowning herself, right there on his coffin. The service concluded. People began to move to an adjacent hall for wine and appetizers. I didn't want to go. I just wanted to find a quiet corner and disappear. I stood up, intending to slip out unnoticed. But then, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Isabella. "Alice," she said, her voice now an intimate whisper, as if just for me. A few guests and a photographer were nearby, pretending not to notice, but I knew they were watching. "I know today has been so hard for you." I said nothing. I just looked at her. "I have something for you," she continued, opening her tiny clutch. "Stanley wanted you to have something to comfort you. A small memento so you'll always feel him with you." She pulled out a silver brooch in the shape of a small butterfly. It was pretty enough, I suppose, but it was a mass-produced item, the kind of thing you could find in any department store. I'd never seen it before in my life. Stanley, with his expert collector's eye, would never have bought something like this. Isabella took my cold hand and placed the brooch in my palm. "You keep this," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet condescension. "Let it remind you of his love." And in that moment, the whole charade just fell apart. I understood everything. This wasn't a gift. It was a final act of humiliation, a declaration of ultimate power. She hadn't just taken my husband's fortune and his legacy. She was now trying to rewrite our most private memories. She wanted to replace the priceless, story-filled gifts Stanley had given me, the paintings, the antiques, the mementos, with this cheap, soulless trinket. She wanted me, and the world, to believe that this was all I was worth. A common brooch, a handout, a pat on the head for the poor, helpless old woman. The photographer's camera flashed, capturing the touching moment. The dutiful daughter-in-law comforting the grieving mother-in-law. I clenched my fist around the brooch, its sharp edges digging into my palm. The physical pain was a strange comfort. It brought me back to my senses. I looked up and met Isabella's ash-gray eyes. For the first time, there was no fear or confusion in my gaze. I didn't say a word. I just looked. A long, silent stare, and for a split second, I saw a crack in that icy facade. I saw a flicker of unease, of confusion at my unexpected silence. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the guests, past the lilies, past the whispered condolences. I walked out of that cold marble building and took a deep breath of the salty Palm Beach air. On the way home, I didn't cry. The grief had given way to something else, something cold and sharp and clear as a shard of ice. It was rage, a quiet rage, not loud or showy, but burning hot and steady like a blue flame. When I got home, I walked into Stanley's study. I opened my palm and looked at the butterfly brooch. It glittered tastelessly under the lamplight. It was a lie. And I knew, in that moment, that I could not live out the rest of my days in a world built on her lies. That cold rage had given me a purpose. It was like a compass suddenly appearing in a storm. It didn't show me the way out, but it at least gave me a direction. I was no longer a ghost drifting through my own home. I began to move with intent, my eyes no longer staring into space, but searching, observing, looking for the breadcrumbs Stanley might have left behind. I knew my husband. He was a careful man, a master chess player who always thought several moves ahead. He would not have left me defenseless, no matter how well hidden the path might be. In the days after the funeral, Isabella was scarce. She was too busy taking the helm of her new empire, holding meetings, giving interviews to the press. Her absence was a gift, granting me the space and quiet I needed to begin my search. I didn't search frantically. No, I did it slowly, methodically, the way I used to reorganize Stanley's library every spring. I believed the answer wouldn't be in the complex legal documents Isabella now controlled. It had to be somewhere closer, more personal, in the places that held Stanley's soul. I started in his study. This room was Stanley's sanctuary. The air still held the scent of old paper, of leather-bound books, and that faint aroma of cherry pipe tobacco, a smell I had breathed in for 50 years. It was the smell of safety, of wisdom, and of love. I sat down in his worn leather armchair, feeling the familiar impression his body had made over the decades. I closed my eyes, trying to listen to the room's whispers. I didn't touch the neatly stacked business papers on his desk. That was Isabella's world. Instead, I turned my attention to the more personal items. I looked through his old notebooks, their pages yellowed with age, filled with his familiar scrawl ideas for art acquisitions, notes from auctions, sketches for our garden. I read his words, smiling through a film of tears. This was the real Stanley. But I found nothing out of the ordinary. Just sweet memories that made Isabella's betrayal taste all the more bitter. After 2 days of fruitless searching, I almost gave up. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Stanley had been too tired at the end, and he really had been manipulated by Isabella. Maybe there was no secret, just a harsh reality I had to accept. That evening, I sat alone in the study, the feeling of emptiness returning. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silver path across the mahogany desk. And that's when my eyes landed on something I had overlooked a dozen times. It was an old leather briefcase, the kind lawyers used to carry, tucked away in a dark corner of the bookshelf, hidden behind a thick set of encyclopedias. It was nothing like the stylish, brand-name briefcases Stanley had favored in his later years. This one was old, the leather worn and faded, the corners scuffed. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Its very plainness was why I'd ignored it. Curiosity piqued. I stood up and pulled it out. It was heavier than I expected. The brass combination lock was tarnished. I tried a few familiar numbers, his birthday, our anniversary, the year we bought the house, but nothing worked. I was about to put it back when something urged me to keep going. I turned the briefcase over. On the back, almost invisible, was a tiny scratch. Someone had used a sharp object to etch 3 tiny letters. D-E-A. David. Edward. Alice. Our son's name, Stanley's middle name, and my name. My breath caught in my throat. It was our code, a private little joke from years and years ago. My hands trembled as I turned the dials to the sequence of David's birthday, then Stanley's, then mine. A dry click echoed in the silent room. The lock had opened. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, there were no thick binders or complicated contracts, just a few items, neatly arranged. The first thing I saw was a set of clipped-together papers. The top page was a copy of the will Stanley and I had drafted together with our lawyer, Samuel Jones, 5 years ago. It was simple and clear. We left everything to each other, and after we were both gone, the estate would be divided among the charities we cared about. I turned to the next page. It was another draft of a will, written entirely in Stanley's own hand. The date on it was only from 6 months ago. It was very similar to the old will, but it included new provisions for establishing the Thompson Legacy Foundation and naming Isabella as its director. But there was one crucial difference. In Stanley's draft, I was named the lifetime chair of the board with absolute veto power. A wave of relief and fury washed over me all at once. So, I was right. His wishes had been twisted, wickedly reinterpreted. Underneath that stack of papers was a small notebook, the kind Stanley always carried in his coat pocket. I opened it. Only a single page had been written on. His handwriting on these last few lines was shaky and faint, lacking its usual strength. I had to squint to read it. Isabella wants to erase the past. She doesn't understand that our real legacy isn't in art galleries or parties. It's where hope begins. Where hope begins? What on earth did that mean? It sounded like a riddle, a code that only I was meant to solve. I read the sentence over and over, searching for a hidden layer of meaning. And then at the very bottom of the briefcase was the last item. A cream-colored envelope with no name on it at all. I opened it carefully. Inside wasn't a letter, but a single, old-fashioned key, the kind for a post office box or a safe deposit box, attached to a small leather tag. On the tag, Stanley had scribbled an address in a part of town I'd never even heard of, a neighborhood on the other side of the city, a world away from the glitz of Palm Beach. And below the address, there was just one line, a direction, a plea. My dearest Alice, if anything feels wrong, don't confront Isabella. She's fighting ghosts that only she can see. Please talk to Sam. He knows everything. Sam. Samuel Jones. Stanley's best friend. The man who'd been there since the beginning, who had helped us draft our original will together. The tears finally came. For the first time since Stanley passed. These weren't tears of grief, but of gratitude. Stanley hadn't abandoned me. He knew. He had sensed something wasn't right. He may not have been able to fight Isabella head-on in his final weakened days, but he had left me a map, a way forward. I clutched those items to my chest. The old briefcase, the handwritten will, the notebook, and the mysterious key. They weren't just lifeless objects. They were Stanley's voice, reaching out to me from beyond. They were my weapons. The fear and confusion that had clouded my mind for weeks simply evaporated, replaced by a resolve as solid as a rock. I had the first pieces of the puzzle. I knew my next move. I wouldn't confront Isabella, not yet. I would follow Stanley's instructions. First thing in the morning, I would call Samuel Jones. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had Stanley by my side, and I had a trusted old friend to turn to. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. A deep, dreamless, and peaceful sleep. Because I knew that tomorrow's dawn wouldn't just bring light, it would bring hope. And I was ready to find where that hope began. The sun rose over the ocean, painting a streak of orange and pink across the sky, just like a promise. Sleep had come to me like a long-lost friend, bringing peace and restoration. When I woke, the emptiness was gone, replaced by a sharp clarity, a sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive victim of my circumstances. I had a map, however vague, and I had a starting point. I didn't call Samuel Jones right away. I knew his office wouldn't be open yet, and more importantly, I needed to prepare myself. This couldn't be a conversation over the phone. I needed to see him face to face, to let him see the determination in my eyes and feel the weight of what I'd discovered. I showered and dressed in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and elegant trousers. I wanted to look like Alice Thompson, a strong, clear-headed woman, not a confused and grieving widow. I brewed a pot of coffee, the familiar aroma filling the kitchen. While I waited for business hours to begin, I sat at the dining table and laid out my findings from the briefcase. Stanley's handwritten will, the notebook with its cryptic message, and the key to an unknown address. I looked at them, no longer as separate items, but as links in a much larger story, a story I was only just beginning to read. At 9 o'clock sharp, I picked up the phone. My heart beat a little faster. Samuel Jones had been retired for a few years, but he kept a small, quiet office where he handled matters only for his closest friends. The voice of his elderly secretary was as warm and familiar as ever. When I said my name, she let out a little cry of delight, which then softened with sympathy. "Oh, Alice, dear, I am so sorry about Stanley. He was such a wonderful man." "Thank you, Martha," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "May I please speak with Mr. Jones? It's rather urgent." A moment later, Sam's deep, trustworthy voice was on the line. "Alice, my friend, I've been meaning to call. How are you holding up?" "I'm all right, Sam. Thank you," I replied, "but I need to see you. Today, if possible, there are some things I need to show you." There was a short pause on the other end, a thoughtful silence, not a surprised one. It was as if he had been waiting for this call. "Of course, Alice. My door is always open for you. When can you be here? An hour? I'll be waiting." Samuel Jones's office was the polar opposite of Isabella's glass tower. It was in a charming old brick building with large windows that looked out onto a street lined with oak trees. Inside, the space was cozy, with worn leather armchairs, floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves filled with old law books, and the smell of paper, leather, and fresh coffee. The place radiated a sense of security, the stability of an older world where a promise and a handshake still meant something. Sam met me at the door himself. He was a tall man, with a full head of silver hair neatly combed back and kind blue eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. He had aged, just as I had, but his gaze was still sharp and warm. He gave me a firm hug, the hug of a dear friend, filled not with pity, but with understanding. "Come in, Alice," he said, leading me into his office. "Martha just made a fresh pot." We sat facing each other across his cluttered but organized mahogany desk. I didn't beat around the bush. I placed the old leather briefcase on his desk. "I found this in Stanley's study," I said. Sam's eyes rested on the briefcase, and I saw a flicker of recognition. He nodded slowly. I had wondered where he put it. I opened the case and laid the contents on the desk, the handwritten will, the notebook, and finally the key. I pushed them toward him. "Sam, what is going on?" He put on his reading glasses and picked up the handwritten will, reading it carefully, though I had the feeling he already knew every word. He turned each page, his nodding growing slower. Then he picked up the notebook, reading Stanley's last words. A heavy sigh escaped his chest. "I was hoping this day would never come, Alice," he said, his voice low and tinged with a deep sadness. He looked up at me, his eyes full of sympathy and a hint of apology. "Stanley made me promise I wouldn't say a word to you unless you came to me yourself. He didn't want to worry you during his final months." And then, Samuel Jones began to talk. His story confirmed my worst suspicions, but it also opened a door to a truth more complex and painful than I could have ever imagined. "First," he said, his voice clear and precise, as if he were presenting a case in court. "About Isabella. Stanley knew everything." I held my breath. Years ago, not long after David passed, Stanley started to notice something about Isabella. A sadness, a defensiveness, a very well-hidden anger. He was worried about her. So, he did something he always felt conflicted about. He hired a private investigator, not to spy, Alice, but to understand. Sam paused to pour me a glass of water. And what he found broke his heart. Isabella wasn't from a middle-class family in New York like she'd always said. That past was a perfect fabrication she had created for herself. The truth is, Isabella was Izzy, an orphan who grew up in the very same Hope House that Stanley had been quietly funding for all those years. The room spun. Isabella was Izzy? A child from the one place Stanley had poured his heart into protecting? She endured terrible things as a child, Alice. Abuse, neglect. Hope House saved her life, but for her, it was also a constant reminder of a past she wanted to erase at any cost. She clawed her way out of there. She studied like a maniac, changed her name, created an entirely new identity. It's a remarkable success story, but one built on a foundation of denial. Stanley admired her grit immensely, but he also saw the danger in it. He saw her deepest fear, the fear of being exposed, of being sent back to being that helpless little girl, Izzy. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process this. It explained everything: the cold exterior, the desperate need for control, and that hidden resentment toward Hope House. "And the will?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "That's the most complicated part," Sam continued. "After he learned the truth, Stanley had the will redrafted. And this," he said, pointing to the papers on his desk, "is his final, legal, and notarized last will and testament. I was the one who witnessed it." He pushed a thick envelope from his side of the desk toward me. "This is your official copy, Alice. Stanley wanted me to keep it for you." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a professionally typed will, with Stanley's signature, Sam's, and another witness's. I read it, and the tears started to flow again. Stanley's will was not an act of punishment. It was a masterpiece of understanding and compassion. It was incredibly generous. Isabella was named president and CEO of the Thompson Legacy Foundation. It was an absolute acknowledgement of her talent and her intelligence. Stanley gave her the power and the status she craved. But there were two ironclad stipulations, two retaining walls that could not be broken. First, I, Alice Thompson, was to be the lifetime honorary chair of the board. This role was not just for show. It came with veto power over any decision related to the sale or change of purpose of the core assets, including our home, the art collection, and especially Hope House. Second, the Foundation's first and non-negotiable legal duty was to take $20 million from the estate and establish a permanent, independently managed trust to ensure that Hope House could operate forever without ever having to worry about money again. I looked up at Sam, my heart aching with love for my late husband. "He gave her everything," I whispered. "He did," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave her the recognition she craved, but he also put up guardrails to protect what he truly valued. He wanted to give her a path to heal her past, to turn Hope House from a source of shame into a source of pride. But maybe that was the very thing she feared most. Facing her past was scarier than losing a fortune. So she buried this will. Instead, she chose to misinterpret that old draft Stanley had written, and she used the chaos after his death to seize control. Now I understood. Isabella's entire performance wasn't just about greed, it was about fear, a fear so profound it had twisted her soul. "So what about this key?" I asked, pointing to the final piece of evidence. Sam gave me a sad smile. "That was Stanley's backup plan. He knew Isabella might act irrationally. He left you your own path to the truth. I don't know what that key opens, Alice. That was the part Stanley wanted you to discover for yourself. But I have a feeling it leads you to where hope begins." I left Samuel Jones's office feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because the truth was out, because I knew I wasn't alone and that my suspicions weren't the ramblings of a crazy old woman. But heavier because that truth was so painful and complex. Isabella wasn't just a cunning usurper, she was a wounded soul, a little girl still running from her own ghosts. Stanley's will wasn't a battlefield, it was a bridge, an attempt to connect Isabella's present to the past she had tried to bury. But instead of walking across that bridge, she had chosen to burn it. I went home and put my copy of the real will in a safe place. I knew I was holding a weapon of immense power. One call from Sam to the Bar Association, and the career and reputation Isabella had so painstakingly built would crumble like a castle of sand. But Stanley's words from the note echoed in my head. "Don't confront Isabella. She's fighting ghosts that only she can see." I decided I would honor his wish, at least until I understood more about those ghosts. I needed to go to Hope House. But before I could act on my plan, Isabella struck first. She moved with a speed and decisiveness that was chilling. She was giving no one time to think, to ask questions. She wanted to create facts on the ground, an irreversible new reality. The first shot was fired in the media. 2 days after my meeting with Sam, a major article appeared on the front page of the Palm Beach Society paper featuring a radiant portrait of Isabella. The headline was grand: "Isabella Thompson, redefining a legacy, building the future." The article, clearly a well-orchestrated piece of public relations, painted Isabella as a modern-day heroine. A brilliant businesswoman, a visionary philanthropist, bravely shouldering the immense legacy of her late father-in-law. It quoted her at length, all polished words about modernizing philanthropy and optimizing resources for maximum impact. And then, the bomb dropped. "One of the Foundation's first bold decisions," the article read, "is a plan to redevelop an old property in the western part of the city. The lot is currently occupied by a small charitable facility, Hope House. Mrs. Thompson, with her strategic vision, recognizes that maintaining such a small-scale operation is inefficient. Instead, the Foundation will construct an architectural landmark on the site, the Isabella Thompson Museum of Contemporary Art. This museum will not only be a cultural highlight for the city, but will also permanently house the priceless art collection of the late Stanley Thompson, making it accessible to the public." I read the paragraph again and again, a wave of nausea washing over me. Redevelop, inefficient, architectural landmark. She was using cold business terms to disguise an act of brutal destruction. She didn't just want the assets, she wanted to wipe Hope House off the map, to grind it into dust so that no trace of her past could ever haunt her again. The article sensitively added that the current residents of Hope House would be relocated to more suitable facilities, a blatant lie I knew was just empty words. This blow wasn't just aimed at Stanley's legacy, it was aimed directly at me. Isabella was sending me a clear message. I am in charge. I can do whatever I want. And you can't stop me. She was trying to box me in, to force me to accept the new reality she was creating. The rage flared inside me again, but this time it was mixed with a very real fear, not for myself, but for the women and children at Hope House. They were the most vulnerable, the voiceless, and now they were about to lose their only safe harbor, all because it was a ghost from Isabella's past. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go there. The next morning I took the old key and the leather tag with the address. I didn't take my own luxury car. I called a taxi, a small act of discretion. The car took me away from the glittering, wealthy side of Palm Beach, heading west, where the buildings grew smaller, the roads rougher, and the air itself seemed thicker. Finally, the taxi pulled up in front of an old two-story building, its cream-colored paint peeling in places. The front wooden fence was missing a few slats, but the small garden inside was carefully tended with bright patches of flowers. A simple wooden sign hung over the door, with the words Hope House artfully painted by hand. This place didn't look like an inefficient, small-scale operation. It radiated a quiet, resilient warmth. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The space was clean and bright, though the furniture was old. The sound of children's laughter echoed from a back room. The faint smell of baking cookies hung in the air. A woman in her 50s, with salt and pepper curly hair and warm, kind brown eyes, came out of a small office. She was wearing an apron dusted with flour. "Can I help you?" she asked, her smile genuine. "Hello," I said, my voice a little shaky. "My name is Alice Thompson. I'm here." I hesitated, not knowing where to begin. The woman's eyes lit up with surprise, then quickly shifted to reverence. "Mrs. Thompson? Mr. S. wife? Oh my goodness, what an honor. I'm Maria, the director here. Please, come in." She led me into her office, a tiny room cluttered with stacks of paper and children's drawings taped to the walls. She quickly cleared a pile of books from the only guest chair. "I am so terribly sorry for your loss," Maria said, her voice sincere. "Mr. S. was our guardian angel. I don't know what we would have done without him." "He loved this place very much," I said, and I knew it was the truth. "We know," Maria replied. "He didn't visit often, to maintain his privacy, but when he didn't just bring checks. He brought his heart. He would sit and play with the children, listen to the women's stories. He genuinely cared." We sat in silence for a moment, sharing a memory of Stanley. Then, I gathered my courage. "Maria, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, ma'am. Many years ago, there was a young girl who lived here. Her name was Izzy." The smile vanished from Maria's face. She looked at me, her eyes filled with caution and a deep, familiar sadness. "Why do you ask about her?" "Because I believe that Izzy is my daughter-in-law, Isabella." Maria froze. She stared at me, as if trying to see if I was telling the truth. Then she sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "Yes," she whispered. "It was her, Isabella. We lost touch with her years ago, after she got a scholarship and left. She changed everything, cut herself off completely. I see her in the papers sometimes. She looks so glamorous. But in her eyes, I can still see that little girl. Always scared, always angry." "What did she go through?" I asked softly. Maria closed her eyes, as if reliving a painful memory. "Things no child should ever have to endure. Her stepfather was a monster. Her mother was too broken to protect her. When she came to us, she was just skin and bones, covered in bruises, wrapped in a terrifying silence. She didn't trust anyone. It took years for her to even smile." My heart clenched. "And now," I said, my voice laced with bitterness, "she wants to tear this place down." I showed her the newspaper article. As she read it, her face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, horrified heartbreak. "No, it can't be," she stammered, her hands shaking. This is our home. These children's home. She can't do this. She, of all people, she was saved in this house." "I think that's exactly why," I said. "She doesn't want the reminder." Maria dropped her head to her desk, her shoulders shaking. I got up, walked over, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not going to let that happen," I said, and as the words came out, I felt a strength I never knew I possessed. Stanley left clear instructions to protect this place, and I'm going to make sure his wishes are honored. Maria looked up, her eyes wet with tears but now shining with a sliver of hope. "You'll help us?" "I'll do more than that," I replied. "We're going to fight. Together." My meeting with Maria and the souls at Hope House lit a fire in me. It was no longer a fire of personal indignation, but one of protection, of responsibility. Stanley had given me a mission, and now I had found my fellow soldiers. But I knew that on the legal and media chessboard where Isabella reigned, simple goodness and truth could be easily crushed. We needed something sharper, something that could pierce the perfect armor Isabella had built around herself. I returned home, my mind racing with plans. I could give the real will to Sam and start a legal fight. We would certainly win. But Stanley had said, "Don't confront Isabella." A public battle would destroy her, turn her into a social pariah. Was that what Stanley would have wanted? To destroy someone he had tried so hard to understand? I didn't think so. Stanley's legacy was about healing, not revenge. There had to be another way, a more delicate path. I needed something that could reach the human part of Isabella, the Izzy who was still cowering in fear, not the Ice Queen on her throne of power. With that thought, I began a different kind of search, not through papers and documents, but through memories and mementos. I wandered through the house, touching objects, trying to see them through Stanley's eyes, trying to remember the stories behind them. I went up to the attic, a place I rarely visited. The air was thick with dust and the smell of forgotten time. Light slanted through the dormer window, illuminating dancing dust motes like tiny fireflies. The attic was our family's memory bank, old trunks filled with photo albums, David's baby clothes, his broken toys. I sat down on the creaking wooden floor and began turning the pages of an album. There were photos of Isabella from her first years with us. She looked younger, her smile a bit stiff, her eyes always watchful. But in a few candid shots, when she wasn't aware of the camera, I saw a softness, a longing to belong. Then I opened an old oak box, the one Stanley used to call his treasure chest. It held the little odds and ends he'd collected over the years, seashells from our travels, old concert tickets, letters from David from his college days. And there, at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of blue velvet, was a small object. I carefully unwrapped it. It was a small wooden bird, carved crudely, clearly by the hand of a child. Its wings were a little lopsided, its eyes just two simple dots of black paint. It was no masterpiece, but it had a strange life to it, a resilience that emanated from the grain of the wood. And then, the memory came flooding back, as clear as if it were yesterday. It was a summer evening, about a year after Isabella and David were married. We were sitting on the veranda after dinner. Stanley was telling one of his adventurous stories from his youth. Suddenly, Isabella, who was usually quiet and reserved, interrupted him. "I have something for you," she said, her voice hesitant. She took this wooden bird from her pocket and placed it in Stanley's hand. "What's this, my dear?" Stanley had asked, his voice gentle. It's the only thing I kept from before," Isabella said, her eyes cast down. "I made it myself when I was a kid. They said it looks like a sparrow, the bird that never gives up." Stanley had taken the wooden bird, turning it over and over in his palm with immense reverence. "It's beautiful, Isabella," he'd said. "It has a strong spirit, just like the person who made it." That night, for the first time, I saw Isabella smile, a real, unguarded smile. It was fleeting, gone in an instant, but it had been there. Now, sitting in the cold attic, I held the wooden bird. The warmth from my hand seemed to seep into the wood. I understood. This wasn't a toy. This was Isabella's forgotten soul. It was the symbol of her survival. It was the most beautiful and true part of her, the part she had tried to bury along with the name Izzy. Stanley hadn't thrown it away. He had kept it in his treasure chest, cherishing it like a rare gem. This was it. This wasn't legal evidence for a courtroom. This was something infinitely more powerful. This was the key to unlocking Isabella's barricaded heart. I brought the bird down to the study and placed it on the desk, next to the cheap butterfly brooch. The contrast was stark. One was a glittering lie, the other a simple truth. One was what Isabella wanted the world to see, the other was who she truly was. I knew what I had to do, but I needed one final piece, something to connect this bird to Hope House, irrefutable proof of Stanley's intentions. The key and the address he'd left, I still hadn't used it. The next day, I returned to Hope House. This time, I didn't come as a visitor. I came as an ally. Maria met me at the door, her eyes lighting up with hope when she saw me. "Mrs. Thompson, it's so good to see you again." "Please, call me Alice," I said. "I have a feeling we're about to become very good friends." I told Maria everything I had found about the real will and about the wooden bird. When I showed her the carving, Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I remember it," she whispered. I remember the day she sat in the corner of the yard, whittling this piece of wood with a dull knife. She hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, and this was the first thing she created. Her story only hardened my resolve. Then I showed her the key and the address. "Stanley left this," I said. "He said it would lead to where hope begins." Maria looked at the address, and then her brow furrowed. "This address, it's not a house. It's the address of an old private storage facility in the commercial district." We looked at each other, the same thought dawning on us both. Without another word, we went there together. The storage facility was in an old brick building that looked like it had seen better days. An elderly security guard looked at us suspiciously, but when I showed him my identification and the key, he consulted a ledger and led us down a long, cold corridor lined with identical steel doors. He stopped in front of a door marked 3B. "Here you are, ma'am." My heart was pounding as I slid the key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. The heavy steel door groaned open with a loud creak. Inside wasn't a room packed with old furniture. It was almost empty. There was just a small wooden table and a single chair, and on that table, placed reverently on a little stand, was one single object. It was a painting, a small oil painting in a simple wooden frame. It depicted a little sparrow taking flight from a bare, withered branch, soaring toward a rising sun on the horizon. The brushwork was simple, but full of emotion. It was the perfect symbol of rebirth and hope. "This is," Maria whispered, her voice full of awe. I stepped closer. I could feel Stanley's presence in that room, stronger than ever before. This was where he came to think, to connect with the quiet part of his legacy. This painting was the heart of it all. I carefully lifted the painting from its stand. Something urged me to turn it over. And that's when I found it, the final piece of the puzzle, the twist that would change everything. On the back of the painting, on the cardboard backing that had yellowed with time, was Stanley's familiar handwriting, written in permanent ink. "For Izzy, so you never forget that you can fly. My promise to Hope House is sealed with this gift. It will forever belong to this place, and my legacy will always protect it." Maria and I just looked at each other, our eyes wide. This was it. This was his moral will, his unbreakable vow. This was the evidence that connected Stanley's love for Isabella to his commitment to Hope House. Isabella could tear up a legal document, but she could never erase this promise. I clutched the painting to my chest. Now, I had everything I needed. I had the real will. I had the wooden bird, the key to Isabella's soul. And I had this painting, the powerful testament to Stanley's true legacy. I walked out of that storage facility, holding the Hope painting as if it were a newborn child. The air outside seemed cleaner, the sunlight brighter. All my doubt and fear had vanished, replaced by an extraordinary calm. I no longer felt like I was on the defensive, reacting to Isabella's moves. Now, I was the one in control. I had a story to tell, a truth to reveal, and I would choose the exact time and place to do it. "What do we do now?" Maria asked, her voice still trembling with emotion. "Do we take this to the lawyers?" "Not yet, Maria," I said, my voice firm. A legal battle would be long, expensive, and bitter. It would turn Stanley's story into a tabloid scandal, and it would destroy Isabella completely. That's not his way. We're going to give Isabella one chance to choose the right path herself. Maria looked at me with a mix of admiration and doubt. You really think she'll change? I believe that Izzy is still inside her, I answered, and we're going to talk to Izzy, not to Isabella. The plan began to form in my head, as clear and coherent as a symphony. The gala for the launch of the Thompson Legacy Foundation, Isabella's crowning achievement, would not be cancelled. On the contrary, it would become the stage for our final act. Isabella had sent out hundreds of invitations, preparing a lavish stage to glorify herself. I would use that very same stage to glorify Stanley's true legacy. The first thing I did when I got home was call Samuel Jones. I told him everything about the bird, the storage unit, and the painting with Stanley's message. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him chuckle, a laugh full of admiration. "Stanley Thompson," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "Even from the great beyond, the man is a grand chess master. He's left you with all the pieces, Alice. Now, what's your move?" "I'm not going for checkmate, Sam," I said. "I'm going to create a situation where she surrenders willingly." I laid out my plan for him. I needed his legal help to ensure everything was done by the book and couldn't be countered by Isabella. Specifically, I asked him to do two things. First, on behalf of an anonymous donor, he was to contact the gala's auction organizers and offer a special, last-minute art piece to raise funds for Hope House. That piece, of course, would be the Hope painting. It was a clever move, because Isabella, who was always preaching about charity, couldn't possibly refuse such a noble gesture in public, especially when it was for the very organization she was trying to dismantle. It would put her in a very awkward position. Second, I asked him to draft a simple but powerful legal document, an official declaration of the deed of gift that Stanley had attached to the painting, outlining the legal consequences if Hope House were to be dissolved. This document would not be made public right away. It would be our ace in the hole, to be used only if absolutely necessary. Sam agreed immediately. A perfect plan, Alice. Elegant and powerful. Very much in Stanley's style. While Sam handled the legal side, Maria and I got to work on our part. We needed allies, and we needed to make sure the right audience would be at that gala. Maria, using her network in the nonprofit community, secretly contacted journalists with a conscience, the kind who wrote about community issues, not just society parties. She didn't give them the details, only hinted at a surprising human interest story that would unfold at the gala, a story about Stanley Thompson's true legacy. My job was to reach out to a few members of Stanley's old board of directors, friends who I knew still respected my husband's memory. I didn't tell them the whole story, just that I had some concerns about the new direction of the foundation, and that I would be grateful if they were present at the gala to witness something important. My vagueness planted seeds of curiosity and doubt. The days leading up to the gala passed in a quiet tension. On the surface, everything was normal. The press continued to praise Isabella and her bold plans. Isabella, basking in her glory, seemed completely unaware of the undercurrents forming. She was so confident in her power and intellect that she couldn't imagine an old woman like me and a small group from Hope House could pose any threat. That arrogance was her Achilles' heel. And then, the most unexpected twist of all happened, a detail that not even I could have planned. 2 days before the gala, I received a phone call, an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Thompson?" a young man's voice asked, trembling with anxiety. "It is. Who's calling?" My name is Julian," he said. "I'm Mrs. Isabella Thompson's assistant." I was stunned. Julian was Isabella's right-hand man, a smart young man who was completely devoted to her. Why on earth was he calling me? "What is it, Julian?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I can't say much over the phone," he whispered, his voice full of fear. She's going too far. The plan for the museum, it's not just about building something. It's about destroying something. She said some scary things. She said she wants to burn it all down, not leave a single brick standing. I don't think she's well. I just wanted to warn you. please be careful?" The call ended abruptly. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear. Julian's warning confirmed my deepest fears. Isabella's obsession had crossed the line from rational to a destructive mania. But that call also brought an unexpected ray of light. It showed that even inside Isabella's fortress, cracks were beginning to appear. The absolute loyalty she demanded was being shaken by her own extremism. Julian, terrified as he was, had followed his conscience. I knew I didn't need to contact him again. He had done his part. He had planted a seed, and that seed, along with everything else we had prepared, was about to blossom on the night of the gala. Everything was ready. The stage was set. The actors were in position. The Hope painting had been accepted for the auction. The special guests had confirmed their attendance. The legal declaration was safe in Sam's briefcase, and the little wooden bird was resting silently in my clutch. The night of the gala descended on Palm Beach like a black velvet curtain, dotted with millions of sparkling stars and the brilliant lights from the seaside mansions. The air was pleasantly cool, carrying the scent of gardenias and the salt of the ocean. It was a perfect night, a perfect setting for the grand play Isabella had so carefully produced. I chose a long gown of deep blue silk, the color of the midnight sea, a color both elegant and understated. I wore little jewelry, just Stanley's pearl necklace, the pearls glowing with a warm white light against my skin. I wanted to look composed and graceful, not a fighter but a keeper of memories. In my small satin clutch were the two most important things, the rustic wooden bird and a clear photograph of Stanley's message from the back of the Hope painting. I didn't bring the real painting. That was an unnecessary risk. It had already been safely delivered to the auction house under the watchful eye of Sam's people. As the car brought me to the venue, the very same art museum where Stanley's memorial had been held, my heart beat with a strange and steady calm. The fear was completely gone. Now, there was only a sharp focus, a readiness to face whatever came next. The museum's main hall had been transformed into a fairy tale landscape. Swags of white and gold silk draped from the high ceiling. Thousands of candles flickered inside glass lanterns, casting a warm, magical glow. A string orchestra was playing the gentle melodies of Vivaldi. The crowd of guests, about 300 of them, were the crème de la crème of Palm Beach, titans of industry, politicians, celebrities, and of course, the media. They chatted and laughed, holding glittering glasses of champagne. Everything was perfect, glamorous, and utterly artificial. I walked in, and for a moment, every eye turned to me. There were whispers, curious glances. My appearance, the widow who had been written out of the will, at the very event honoring the one who took everything, was a surprise. I didn't shy away from their stares. I held my head high, smiled politely, and walked gracefully into the room. I saw a few of Stanley's old friends, the board members I had called. They nodded at me, their eyes full of expectation. I also saw the journalists Maria had contacted. They were watching the crowd with a particular intensity. All the pieces were in place. And then I saw her. Isabella was, without a doubt, the queen of the ball. She wore a magnificent ball gown of shimmering gold, a dress so perfectly fitted she looked like a living statue cast from precious metal. Her blonde hair was styled in an intricate updo, and the diamond jewelry she wore caught the light, sending out dazzling, blinding flashes. She stood in the center of a circle of admirers, smiling, shaking hands, radiating an aura of power and success. When she saw me, the smile on her lips tightened for a fraction of a second. A flash of annoyance, then surprise, crossed her gray eyes, but she was a master actress. She immediately masked it with a look of concern. She broke away from the group and glided toward me. "Alice," she said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried you might not be feeling up to it." Her words were a perfect blend of a caring daughter-in-law and a subtle reminder to everyone of my frail condition. "I wouldn't miss such an important night for the world, Isabella," I replied, my voice calm. "I'm here to witness Stanley's legacy continue." I put a deliberate emphasis on the word witness. She gave me a smile that held no warmth. "I think you'll be very proud." She glanced at my dress, a quick, appraising look, then turned away to greet a senator who had just arrived. I didn't try to mingle. I found a small table in a relatively quiet corner where I could observe the entire room. Sam came and sat with me, looking quite dapper in his tuxedo. "Everything is set," he whispered. "The painting will be auctioned last, right before Isabella's speech. The auctioneer has been instructed to read the name of the anonymous donor and the purpose of the donation aloud." "Thank you, Sam," I said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank Stanley. Tonight is his night." The party unfolded according to Isabella's script. There were speeches praising her, short films about glamorous charity projects. Then the auction began. Luxurious items were presented: a trip to Paris, a diamond, encrusted watch, a rare bottle of wine. The bids climbed higher and higher to the crowd's excitement. Finally, the moment came. The auctioneer, a cheerful man with a professional smile, took the stage. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "our final and most special item of the evening." This piece was added at the very last minute, an incredibly generous donation from a philanthropist who wishes to remain anonymous. An assistant brought the Hope painting onto the stage and placed it on an easel. Under the spotlight, the little painting radiated a simple but powerful beauty. The room fell silent with curiosity. I saw Isabella frown slightly. She clearly hadn't been told about this. "This painting is entitled Hope," the auctioneer continued, "and 100% of the proceeds from its sale will be donated directly to a local charity in great need of support. Hope House." A murmur went through the room. Hope House? The name was so plain, so out of place in this glittering world, but I saw the journalists begin to scribble furiously in their notepads. Stanley's friends exchanged meaningful glances. I looked at Isabella. Her face was a frozen mask. The first crack had appeared in her perfect facade. She couldn't believe it. The very name she was trying to bury was now being announced with honor on her own stage. She shot a look at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fury and suspicion. I simply met her gaze, my expression serene. The bidding for the painting began. And then a wonderful thing happened. One of Stanley's old friends, a wealthy industrialist, raised his paddle to start the bidding, then another. The auction became spirited, not because of the painting's artistic value, but because of the meaning behind it. It was as if everyone understood. It became a silent vote, a show of support for Stanley's true legacy. In the end, the painting sold for an unbelievable price, a figure that would keep Hope House running for years. When the gavel came down, a thunderous round of applause erupted, louder than for any of the luxury items before it. Isabella stood there, a pained smile plastered on her face. She had been backed into a corner, forced to applaud the success of her own mortal enemy. Her perfect script had just been completely derailed. That's when I knew it was time. The moment was perfect. I stood up and walked slowly toward the stage, where Isabella was preparing for her keynote speech. She saw me coming, her eyes flashing a warning, but I didn't stop. I walked directly to the quiet waiting room behind the stage. I knew she would follow me. She couldn't risk me making a scene. Just as I predicted, a few seconds later, the door to the waiting room flew open. Isabella stormed in and slammed it shut. The perfect veneer was gone. Before me stood a woman trembling with rage. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice as sharp as a razor. "What is this game? Are you trying to humiliate me?" I didn't answer. I just quietly opened my clutch. I didn't take out the will. I didn't take out any legal proof. I took out the little wooden bird, and I placed it on the vanity table between us. The waiting room behind the stage felt as suffocating as a sealed box. The gentle music and chatter from the world outside seemed to belong to another planet, separated from us by the heavy oak door Isabella had just slammed shut. In here, there was only the pale yellow light from the bulbs around the makeup mirror, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, and a silence between us that was stretched as taut as a wire. Isabella stood before me, her chest rising and falling beneath the gold silk. She was like a cornered panther, radiating pure, dangerous fury. Her calm, regal mask had completely fallen away, revealing a face contorted with rage. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed again, her voice sharp, each word a shard of broken glass. "Who do you think you are, ruining my night? Did you want to humiliate me in front of everyone? Did you want to see me fall?" I said nothing. I knew that any word from me right then would only be fuel on the fire. I just quietly opened my clutch, a slow, deliberate action in stark contrast to her explosive turmoil. I didn't pull out the will or anything that looked like a legal weapon. I took out the little wooden bird. I placed it on the cold marble countertop, right between us. It sat there, small and rustic, an object so out of place in the room's opulence that it was absurd. But its impact was more powerful than any accusation. Isabella's eyes locked onto the wooden bird. The rage in them was instantly extinguished, like a fire doused with ice water. The fury was replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. Then, the shock gave way to a raw, naked panic. Her entire body went rigid. I could see the tremor in the corner of her lip, see the way her chest constricted as she struggled to breathe. The icy armor she had worn for so many years, already cracked on stage, now shattered into dust. "Where?" she stammered, her voice suddenly stripped of all its authority. "Where did you find that?" "It was where your father-in-law always kept it," I replied, my voice very soft, without a hint of blame or triumph. "In his treasure chest, with the things he cherished most." My words were like a needle piercing the balloon of her pride. Stanley hadn't thrown it away, he had treasured it. The secret she thought was buried with her past had been preserved like a precious jewel by the very man she both admired and feared. Isabella took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth, as if the bird were a venomous snake. She shook her head in a desperate, almost unconscious denial. "No, it can't be. It doesn't mean anything. It's just an old toy, a worthless piece of trash." "Was it a toy, Izzy?" I said the name, softly but clearly. The forbidden name, the name of a rejected past. It hit Isabella like a bolt of lightning. She flinched, her eyes wide with a pain and horror so profound it was as if I'd just slashed open an old, unhealed wound. "Don't you call me that name!" she screamed, her voice breaking, no longer a sharp hiss but a cry of anguish, a roar that had been suppressed for 30 years. "She's dead!" "She died, do you understand me?" "She never died," I said, keeping that same gentle tone, as if speaking to a wounded animal. "She was just hiding behind designer dresses, and law degrees, and buildings with your name on them. But she was always there, wasn't she? Always lurking in the shadows, still scared, still angry, and still hurting." I slowly took the photograph of the back of the painting from my clutch. I didn't hand it to her, I just laid it on the counter, next to the wooden bird. "Your father-in-law knew everything, Isabella. He knew who you were, and he didn't look down on you. He was proud of you." "Proud?" Isabella laughed, a bitter sound like shattering glass. "Proud of a child from the slums? Proud of a bastard with no father, abandoned by her own mother? That's not pride. That's pity." "It wasn't pity. It was admiration," I said, my voice firm. He admired the little girl named Izzy who survived all by herself, who fought her way out of hell. He didn't erase you. He honored you. I pushed the copy of the real will toward her. This is what he wanted. He gave you the power, the recognition you always craved. But he also wanted you to face your past, not to destroy it, but to heal it. He wanted you to use your strength to protect other children just like you once were. That's the real legacy, not a museum with your name on it, built on the ashes of your memory. Isabella looked down at the papers on the counter. The will, the photograph, and the wooden bird, the 3 pieces of a life she had tried to tear apart. She wasn't screaming anymore. All the fight seemed to drain out of her. The rage was gone, leaving behind only a breathtaking fragility. She wrapped her arms around herself, clutching her own elbows, as if trying to hold herself together. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice a broken thing. Tears began to trace paths down her perfectly made-up cheeks, leaving black streaks of mascara. "You don't understand. You can't know what it's like to have people look at you like you're garbage, to be so hungry it hurts, so cold it burns. If I don't have all this, if I'm not strong, not ruthless, I'll become her again. That ragged, dirty, helpless little girl. People will look at me with that pity again. I can't go back there. I can't." The confession poured out of her like a flash flood. It was a primal fear, 30 years of pain finally released. I no longer saw a cold lawyer, a powerful socialite. In front of me was just Izzy, a little girl, trembling in the dark. And in that moment, All the anger I had held on to simply dissolved. All that was left was an immense compassion. I stepped forward, not as an adversary, but as a mother. For the first time, I reached out my hand, not to strike, but to support. I gently took her ice-cold hand in mine. Isabella flinched at my touch, as if from an electric shock. She tried to pull away, her eyes wild with a defensive panic. "Don't touch me." But I held on, not with force, but with a gentle persistence. "I'm here, Isabella. I'm not going anywhere." "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice a mix of fury and despair. "Why won't you just let the past die? I forgot it. Izzy doesn't exist anymore. Do you hear me? She's buried in the ashes of that miserable place. But you're not, are you?" I asked softly. "You're still fighting her ghost every single day." "I'm not fighting anyone," she nearly shouted, trying to regain control. "Everything I have today, I earned myself, with sweat and blood and tears. I deserve it. I've paid him back for his help. I worked like a dog for his company. I made him millions. I elevated this family's name. It's mine now. It's my reward. I don't owe him or anyone a single thing." The words tumbled out, sharp and bitter, the last wall she was throwing up to defend herself. I listened, without interrupting, letting her purge all the pent-up resentment. When she finally stopped, breathing heavily, I spoke, my voice still calm and full of empathy. "You're right. You worked incredibly hard. You are brilliant." And Stanley never doubted that for a second. He was so proud of what you accomplished. "But you're wrong about one thing, Isabella." "Wrong about what?" she asked, her eyes defiant. "You think his love and his help was a debt you had to repay," I said. "But my dear, real love doesn't work that way. It's not a business contract. Stanley helped you. He helped Hope House, not to get something in return. He did it because that's who he was." I gently uncurled her clenched fingers and placed the wooden bird in her palm. "He didn't need you to pay him back. He only hoped that one day, when you were strong enough, you would pay that kindness forward, that you would become a protector, not a destroyer. Your real strength isn't in the buildings with your name on them or the money in your account. It's right here." I squeezed her hand gently around the bird. "It's in the fact that you survived, that you flew away from that dead branch all on your own. Stanley knew that, and so do I. He didn't want you to pay a debt to the past. He wanted you to set it free." The rough texture of the bird in her palm seemed to awaken something inside Isabella. Her defensive walls began to crumble, not from attack, but because they were melting in the warmth of empathy. She looked down at it, then back up at me, her gray eyes now flooded with tears and utter confusion. "Why?" she asked again, but this time the question held no challenge, only a faint plea, a simple question that held a lifetime of pain. "Why was he so good to me? Why are you being so good to me? After everything I've done?" "Because that's what family does, my child," I answered, and now tears were streaming down my own cheeks. "Family doesn't hide the scars, it heals them together." And that's when she finally broke. The last wall came down. Isabella, the Queen of Palm Beach, sank to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and sobbed like a child. Not the calculated tears for a stage, but the racking, agonizing sobs of a soul that had held itself together for far too long, and was finally allowing itself to be weak, to feel the pain, and to begin to heal. Time seemed to stand still in that waiting room. I don't know how long we stood there, with only the sound of Isabella's choked sobs and my own compassionate silence. Slowly, her crying subsided, quieting to soft, shuddering breaths, like a storm that has passed. She still clutched the wooden bird in her hand, as if it were the only life raft in a turbulent sea. Outside, the music had stopped. I could hear the master of ceremonies, his voice a little flustered, announcing that there would be a short delay. The real world was calling. The stage was waiting for its queen to return. Isabella lifted her head. Her face was a mess of tears and smeared makeup. But through it all, for the very first time, I saw a clarity in her gray eyes. The fear and the defensiveness were gone, replaced by an exhaustion and a fragile flicker of hope. What do I do now?" she asked, her voice raspy and small, like a lost child's. This was the moment of truth. I could have produced the will, forced her to comply, but that would have been my victory, not hers. Stanley had wanted to give her a chance to choose for herself. "You have two choices, Isabella," I said softly. "You can walk out there and continue with your performance. No one will ever know what happened in this room. Or you can walk out there and become the person your father-in-law always believed you could be." I said no more. I took a step back, giving her the space to decide. The choice was hers. The legacy was hers. Isabella looked at me, a long, searching look. Then she looked down at the wooden bird in her hand. She took a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to pull in all her remaining hesitation. She walked to the mirror, not to fix her makeup, but to look at her true self in the reflection. She used a tissue to wipe away the mascara streaks, leaving a face that was plain, vulnerable, and honest. Then she turned back to me and nodded. A single, decisive nod. When Isabella walked back onto that stage, the entire room fell silent. Everyone could see the change. This was no longer the glittering ice queen, but a woman with swollen eyes and a strange, new composure. She walked to the podium, ignoring the prepared speech that sat there. She placed the small wooden bird on the lectern, a gesture that only she and I understood. She took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling slightly but clear and strong. "My apologies for the delay. I've just had a conversation that has changed everything." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Tonight, we are here to honor the legacy of a great man, Stanley Thompson," she continued. "And I have come to realize that, in my own pride, I have nearly misinterpreted that legacy entirely." She paused, taking a deep breath. "There has been a change of plans. The auction for the development property is permanently canceled." A wave of shock spread through the room. "Instead," Isabella's voice grew firm, "the first and most important act of the Thompson Legacy Foundation will be to follow the true and final will of its founder. We will be endowing a permanent $20 million grant to an organization that once saved my life when I was a child." She took one last, deep breath, and for the first time, she said the name to the entire world. "To Hope House." The shock turned into a stunned silence, which then erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. People rose to their feet, not just to applaud the generosity, but to honor the incredible courage of the woman on the stage. Isabella smiled, a real smile, though fresh tears were streaming down her face. "And finally," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I want to publicly thank one person, the person who reminded me of that true legacy, not with law but with love and understanding. Thank you, Alice. My mother." She looked directly at me, and in that gaze, I saw it all: gratitude, remorse, and the promise of a new beginning. 5 years have passed since that fateful night. My life, Isabella's life, and the life of Hope House have all changed in ways I never could have imagined. Isabella kept her promise. With her talent and drive, she transformed the Thompson Legacy Foundation into a powerful force for good. But now, her moral compass was recalibrated. She was still a brilliant businesswoman, but warmth and compassion had replaced her cold arrogance. The art museum was still built, but not on the grounds of Hope House. It was named the Stanley and Alice Thompson Museum, and a special wing was dedicated to showcasing artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. My relationship with Isabella was reborn from the ashes. It isn't a typical mother and daughter-in-law relationship. It's deeper. We are two women who walked through the darkness together, who saw each other's most vulnerable parts, and who chose forgiveness over destruction. We don't see each other constantly, but when we do, there's a quiet understanding that needs no words. Sometimes, I'll see her visiting Hope House, not as a major donor, but just sitting quietly on a bench in the yard, watching the children play, with the little wooden bird always in her coat pocket. Izzy and Isabella have finally learned to live in peace with one another. As for me, I have found my peace. I'm no longer the honorary chair of the foundation. Once everything was on a stable course, I passed all responsibility to Isabella and the board. My part was done. Now, I fill my days with simple joys, tending my garden, reading, and volunteering at the Hope House Library once a week. I tell stories to the children with the same eyes that Izzy once had. I tell them stories about sparrows that never give up. Looking back on it all, I've come to understand a few things. A legacy, my friends, isn't what we leave behind on paper, in bank accounts, or in buildings that bear our name. A true legacy is the invisible imprint we leave on the hearts of others. It's the kindness we plant, the healing we offer, the hope we ignite. Stanley understood that. He didn't leave me a battle to be won, he left me a riddle to be understood. And I've also learned that forgiveness is not an act of weakness. On the contrary, it requires a tremendous strength. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the pain. It means choosing not to let that pain define you any longer. By forgiving Isabella, I also freed myself from the weight of my own anger and bitterness. Sometimes, life forces us into storms we think we cannot survive, but it's in the eye of the storm that we find our true strength. The strength not to destroy our enemies, but to see the humanity within them. Now, every morning, when I sit on my veranda and watch the sun paint the ocean pink, the silence is no longer an abyss, it's a symphony. I can hear Stanley's laughter in the breeze and feel his love in the warmth of the Sunday. His legacy wasn't just protected. It is living, breathing, and continuing to soar, just like the little sparrow in the painting of Hope. And I, a 77-year-old woman, feel incredibly lucky to have been a part of that journey. Life is still full of so much beauty, isn't it? Thank you for listening to my whole story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll give it a like, share it with those you care about, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And please, do leave a comment below with your own thoughts, perspectives, or stories, so we can all connect and share with one another.